Josiah Wren walked into the Wind River Range in the autumn of 1837 with $11 in trade goods, a little coffee, a paper of powder, a dozen flints, and a bag of galena lead he'd melt into balls himself over his own fire, and a smoothbore gun most men today would laugh at. The nearest gunsmith sat 400 miles behind him, back down the trail, past the last fort, and if that gun broke a lock spring in January, there was no one for a month's hard walk who could fix it. And yet he never once wished for the fine rifle the movies would later hand him. He wished for dry powder and a good flint and an elk to cross his sights. But here's the twist. The gun that actually kept him alive is not the one you've been sold. My name is Amos Ward. I'm 55 years old, seventh generation on this ridge in the southern Appalachians. My people settled it in the 1790s, cleared it by hand, buried their dead on it, and I've never once left it for longer than a season. My grandfather Eli raised me from a boy, and before he passed, he sat me down at the kitchen table and made me copy every last thing he knew into a leather journal in my own hand, page after page by lamplight. And swear on it that the old ways would not die with me. This is me keeping that promise, every word of it. The question was never what those men carried. The question is who got rich selling you the legend. Number 3 outshot the whole world for 88 years straight, but that's later. Picture a Hudson's Bay post in the far country, the counter worn smooth by 10,000 hands. A trapper lays down 20 prime beaver skins. Call it $7.50 in cash money, a season's careful work, drowned to the shoulders in cold creeks, and walks out with a plain smoothbore. 60 caliber, near enough a 20 gauge. A barrel that ran anywhere from 30 inches to a full 48, iron gone gray with handling. A big brass trigger guard, oversized on purpose so a man could get a wool-gloved finger inside it in January without fumbling his one shot away. And a little sitting fox stamped right into the lock plate so a man who couldn't read a word knew he was holding the genuine article and not some cheap copy that would burst on him. That gun did everything, and that was the whole point of it. Load a single round ball, it dropped an elk at 50 paces. Pour in a charge of shot instead, it filled the pot with grouse and duck and rabbit. One gun, one barrel, and the whole animal kingdom was supper. No specialist tool for this and another for that. A man out 400 miles couldn't carry a rack of guns, so he carried the one that never told him no. Here's what the legend won't tell you, neighbor. In 1836, the Rocky Mountain outfits sat down and stocked up for the whole year's trade. Now listen to the count. They bought 10 Hawken rifles, 9 American rifles, and 84 of these humble trade guns. 84. That's not a footnote, friend. That's a landslide. The gun that actually won the West was cheap, plain, and smoothbored, and Hollywood cut it clean out of the picture, because you cannot sell romance on a $20 fowling piece with a fox stamped on the side. But the record doesn't lie the way a movie does. The Hudson's Bay Company was already logging these guns into its books as far back as 1761. That's before there was a United States to speak of. Barnett, Wilson, Ketland, the great London and Birmingham makers stamped them out by the literal thousand and shipped them across the ocean by the crate. And the men who actually did the trapping, who bled for those beaver, trusted their lives to a plain trade gun for 100 solid years. They didn't ban the trade gun. They just quietly made you feel like a fool for admiring one. 84 cheap guns against 10 famous ones. Hold that number in your hand. The next one is the gun a French father cradled through a Dakota winter cold enough to freeze the breath in your chest. Now, before we go on, everything I just told you, every caliber and trade price and the year written in that company ledger, I keep it written down the way Eli kept his, in plain ink, so a number never slips away from me in the night. I gathered it all into one place, a thing I call the Lost Frontier Skills Handbook. The loads, the old prices, the skills behind the weapons. The whole record of how these people actually lived and armed themselves and fed themselves, not the myth version somebody sold you at the picture show. If you're watching this on your television, you'll see a small square code in the corner of the screen. Hold your phone's camera up to it. Don't tap anything. Just hold it there a moment, and it'll open right up. If you're on a phone or a tablet, it's the very first link sitting just under this video. And if you'd rather just go there yourself, go to amosward.com. That's amosward.com. Write it on the back of an envelope if you have to. That's what envelopes are for. It runs about the price of a box of shells, and it's the whole library in one place. Everything Eli gave me. That's the only time I'll bring it up. Now, back to the ridge. The winter of 1804, the Mandan villages on the upper Missouri, the river locked hard with ice. Lewis and Clark are hunkered down against a cold that split trees like gunshots in the dark. And among the men riding out that season is Toussaint Charbonneau, the interpreter, and the journals note something particular about him, his elegant fusil, not a common trade musket like the 84 in that ledger. A fine French smoothbore, longer and lovelier than the ordinary gun, 52 to 55 inches of slender barrel, bored around 60 caliber, the kind of piece a man kept oiled and was proud to be seen with. The French had been arming this continent since the 1600s, long before the English got their footing. As one plain record puts it, from the 17th century on, French fur traders, and later the British, supplied their clients with smoothbore muskets, both as outright gifts and in trade for pelts. That's the whole engine of the frontier gun trade. In one sentence, friend. Not glory, not destiny. Commerce. A gun given to seal a bargain, and 100 more given to keep it. And these guns were everywhere, in every condition you could name, from proud to pitiful. Clark himself scratched a line into his journal on the 26th of September, 1804. Some of the Sioux he met were, in his own rough spelling, badly armed with fusils. Badly armed. Sit with that a second. It means the gun was so common, so thick on the ground, that it was already worn slap out in some hands, locks loose, stocks cracked and bound with rawhide, barrels pitted, passed down and traded on until it barely sparked. The modern collector world has flipped that whole thing on its head. A fine period fusil today is a museum piece behind 2 panes of glass, climate-controlled, priced past what a trapper earned in a hard decade of drowning in cold rivers. But in 1804, it was a working tool leaning by a lodge door with the frost on it, and a man judged it by one question only: does it feed my family? And not by any auction card in copperplate script. The knowledge still works. The load still works. The gun just isn't on the shelf anymore. An elegant gun for a father in a strange and frozen country. The next one is the rifle that could actually reach out and touch a man at 200 yards. Before the mountains, there was the long rifle. The Kentucky, the Pennsylvania, same graceful gun by 2 names, full-stocked in curly maple clear to the muzzle. Flintlock, a barrel so long a tall man could stand it beside him and near look it in the eye. Where the smoothbore threw a ball, and said a prayer. This one had rifling cut in slow spiral grooves down the whole length of the bore, and rifling spins the ball, and spin means truth at distance, the way a thrown football flies straight and a thrown brick tumbles. Calibers ran small and honest and thrifty, 36, 40, 45, 50. A 36 for squirrel and rabbit, so light on lead you could shoot all autumn on a pound of it and not waste a grain barking tree rats. A 50 saved back for deer and for defense, for when the target shot back, and where a smoothbore was near useless, past 60 or 100 yards, the ball wandering off wherever it pleased. A good long rifle in a trained hand would reach clean out to 200 yards and put the ball exactly where the eye asked it to go. That was the early trapper's gun, neighbor, not the celebrity iron in the paintings. A man came west out of Pennsylvania or Kentucky, carrying the very rifle his father carried before him, oiled and mended and dear to him, and it served mile after mile. Today, the fantasy is a scoped rifle and a laser rangefinder, and $800 gone before you've bought a single cartridge to feed it. The long rifleman had iron sights filed by hand, a hinged patch box let into the stock for his greased linen patches, and an eye trained since he was a boy of 6, standing at his father's elbow. He didn't buy his accuracy off a shelf. He built it, one patient shot at a time, over years. The rifling still works exactly the same today as it did then. The physics of a spinning ball didn't change one whit. Only the price tag did. First pattern break. Notice it now. 12, 11, 10. Every single gun so far is a plain working tool that somebody later dressed up in expensive legend and sold right back to you at a markup. That's the whole pattern of this list. And it gets sharper the further down we go, because now we come to the legend itself. The big one. Here it is. The gun in every painting, every movie poster, cradled by every buckskin hero who ever squinted at a sunset. The St. Louis Hawken. Half stock, heavy in the hands, 54 caliber, about 10.5 pounds of dense walnut and iron you felt in your shoulders by the end of a day's walk. Jacob and Samuel Hawken, 2 brothers, built them in St. Louis from a shop dating back to 1815. And the very first one on the record was made in 1823 for William Henry Ashley himself, the fur baron. It was a fine gun. I'll give it every inch of that. $22.50 to $25 for a plain, honest one, and up to $38 for an engraved beauty with a patch box that shone. Real money, near 3 seasons of beaver for the fancy grade. Barrels of 33 and 36 inches, thick-walled to take a heavy charge, acclaimed reach some boosters put near 400 yards, though I'll be honest with you, friend. The way Eli taught me to be honest, a real aimed killing hit was a fraction of that boast. Jim Bridger owned one, a 54 caliber marked S. Hawken, that sits behind glass today in the Montana Historical Society, where you can go look at it. Kit Carson, Jed Smith, Hugh Glass, Joe Meek, the record puts Hawkins in all their hands. But here is the part the legend quietly buried under the buckskin. There is no mention of a Hawken in the trade in the whole of the 1820s. Exactly one in the whole of the 1830s. One, the famous men named above mostly picked their Hawkins up after the fur trade had already died its death around 1840, as old scouts and guides, not as young trappers. So where in the world did the towering legend come from? A novel. That's the answer. A man named George Frederick Ruxton wrote a book called Life in the Far West in 1848 and put a shining Hawken in his hero's hands. Bought in the year 1825, years before that was even likely to happen. The legend was written down with a pen after the trapping was already over and done and the last beaver dam gone quiet. They didn't lie about the hawking. It was a good gun. They just sold you the story instead of the ledger, and the story was cheaper to print. A gun made famous by a novelist's ink. The next one was old on this continent before Europe ever laid an eye on it. Not every frontier weapon came off a boat across the ocean. The pipe tomahawk, a hatchet head with a hollowed bowl cast right into the pole, the back of the head. So the very same tool that split your kindling at dusk, also smoked at the council fire that night, is a genuine, honest-to-God North American invention. There is no European ancestor for it anywhere. None. No blacksmith in London dreamed it. It was dreamed up here, on this ground, out of this need. It shows up in the written record as early as 1700, and by 1725 to 1750, it was a common trade item passing from hand to hand, between nations and traders across the whole eastern frontier. Now think hard about what that single object carried in its two ends, neighbor. A weapon on the one end, honed to split bone. A pipe on the other, for the slow smoke that sealed a treaty. War and peace forged into a single haft of hickory, and a man chose with his own hand which end he turned toward you, the blade or the bowl. There's a whole diplomacy in that, a whole way of dealing between peoples. The modern world can't make anything half that honest anymore. We buy a hatchet at the hardware store for $9 and a pipe from somewhere else entirely, and neither one of them means a solitary thing beyond itself. The pipe tomahawk was a tool, a weapon, and a diplomat all at once, and it cost a man a few good skins. The museums prize them now precisely because they cannot be faked into meaning. You can copy the shape, but you can't copy the world that gave it. Two faces. The craft survives. A good smith can still forge one. What's gone, and gone for good, is a world where a single object could honestly be that many things at once. Second pattern break. Every item on this list, somebody handed you the flashy store-bought replacement and told you the old thing was crude and simple. But it was never crude. It was complete. It was finished. Now we come down to the blades. And the first one is a knife wrapped up tight in a lie. Say the words Mountain Man knife to most folks and they'll fire back, Green River, quick as drawing breath. The J. Russell Company knife, stamped Green River Works right on the blade, the knife that supposedly skinned every last beaver in the whole of the Rocky Mountains. It's a fine knife, I'll hold to that. Good steel, good balance, honest work. It's also, if we're going to be square with each other, a bit of a fraud in the timeline. Because J. Russell and Company didn't stamp Green River Works on so much as one blade until around 1837, and that knife most likely didn't reach the mountain rendezvous way out west before 1838, and the classic trapping era, the golden age of the legend, largely finished and buried by 1840. Do that arithmetic, friend. The famous fur trade knife barely overlaps the fur trade at all. A year or two at the tail, if that. Its real heyday runs from about 1840 clear into the late 1800s. The settlers and buffalo hunters and homesteaders who came after, not the trappers of the legend at all. And that romantic old phrase, give it to him up to the Green River, meaning drive the blade home clear to the hilt where the stamp was. That's folklore of uncertain birth, dressed up in whiskers later to sound like frontier gospel handed down from the first fire. Now, a good working knife was worth pure gold out there. I'll never take that from it. A man skinned with it, ate with it, carved his traps and his shelter with it, and defended his own life with it every single day of his life. That part is true and always will be true. But the idea that one brand name ruled the mountains, that's a story sold to you backward, from the future looking back. It's no conspiracy, neighbor. Nobody sat in a dark room. It's just how a good, honest product gets a fat legend stapled onto it after the fact, once the men who could have corrected the record were all in the ground. A knife arrived too late for its own legend. The next one earned its legend, the whole immortal thing, in about 90 seconds flat. The 19th of September, 1827. A sandbar in the Mississippi River, near Natchez, low and muddy in the September heat. Two groups of men come down to settle a bitter quarrel with a formal duel, pistols at paces, all very proper. And the second the pistol's empty, it collapses into a screaming brawl. 12 men on that bar of sand. And in about 90 seconds, the record sets it down plain. The entire historic fight was over in about 90 seconds. 2 men lay dead in the mud, and 2 more were down, wounded and bleeding. In the dead middle of it was Jim Bowie. He was shot at least twice. Stabbed with a sword cane, struck hard on the head, knocked down. And still, gut shot and bleeding and half blind, he got hold of Major Norris Wright and killed him with a big knife. Drove it home. Dr. Thomas Maddox, who stood right there and watched it happen, counted it up decades afterward for the record. 2 killed and 2 wounded out of the 12 persons engaged. That 90 seconds made the blade immortal for 200 years. The knife itself, the one his brother Rezin claimed to have forged over in Avoyelles Parish, Louisiana, ran about 9 1/4 inches of blade, a full 1.5 inches wide at the spine, thick and heavy. A cleaver near enough, a chopping weight of steel a man could trust absolutely when the powder was spent and gone and the other fellow was still coming. But I'll keep you honest here, friend. The exact way Eli kept me honest at that kitchen table. Who actually forged the first true Bowie is disputed hot to this very day. A master blacksmith named James Black up in Arkansas is a strong rival claimant with his own believers. And what Jim carried on to that sandbar was simply a big butcher-like knife, not yet the standardized, guarded, clip-pointed Bowie that every mail-order catalog in the country would later sell by the thousand. The weapon got standardized after the legend caught fire, not before it. The fame came first. The pattern came chasing after. The steel worked. The man was hard as the steel. And the story only grew in the retelling, year on year. A blade made famous by a fight, not by a factory. Now the guns come back around, and these last ones changed everything, right at the very end of the age. A rifle is one shot, one, and then you're standing there reloading and reloading a muzzleloader, powder down the bore, patch ball, ram it home, prime the pan. Takes the better part of a full minute you very well may not have when something is closing on you fast. So a man who could afford the extra iron carried a pistol for the close, ugly up against it work. The horse pistol, the belt pistol, single-shot flintlocks that lived in a saddle holster or shoved through a wool sash at the waist. The favored maker was Thomas Ketland and Company, out of London and Birmingham both, turning out contract flintlock pistols by the crate that crossed the ocean by the shipload. Big board, heavy in the fist, a smoothbore barrel meant for arm's length certainty and nothing else, not for distance, not for a fine sight picture. You didn't aim a horse pistol the way you aimed a long rifle. You shoved it out forward till it near touched the man, and you fired. That was the whole cold logic of frontier arms, neighbor, and you'd best understand it. Every gun a man owned bought him exactly one shot. And after that one shot cracked, he lived or he died on the next tool down his belt, and the next after that. The modern shooter can't hardly imagine living inside that arithmetic. We think in magazines and speed loaders and 30 rounds. A frontiersman fought in ones, one rifle ball, then one pistol ball, then the knife, and then his two hands. And here's the thing Eli made sure I understood. A man who truly understood that arithmetic down in his bones stayed calm when the trouble came, because he knew panic empties a gun faster than any enemy alive. And an emptied gun in a shaking hand is just an awkward club. The pistol was insurance, plain and simple, and it was expensive insurance a poor man went without, which is exactly why the very next thing on this list set the whole world on fire. A gun that handed a man not one shot, but five. Samuel Colt patented his revolving pistol on the 25th of February, 1836, and built it in a brand new factory at Paterson, New Jersey. For the first time in the whole long history of men and guns, a man held 5 shots in one hand with no reloading at all between them, just cock and fire and cock and fire against every single shot flintlock on that Natchez sandbar and every muzzle-loading rifle in these mountains. 5 shots in a row was flat witchcraft, a thing out of a dream. And here's the honest catch, friend, the one the whole frontier fantasy skips clean over. The Paterson came right at the dying tail end of the fur trade, 1836, with the beaver trapping already fading fast toward its grave. It was never the Rocky Mountain trapper's gun, not really. It found its true home a little later, and a little south, with the Texas Rangers, the men fighting a different and faster kind of war from the backs of galloping horses, where 5 shots without reloading meant everything. The mountain man of the legend never once carried a Paterson, and Colt's very first swing at glory nearly sank him dead to the bottom. That fine Paterson factory in New Jersey closed its doors in 1842, bankrupt. The idea was a full generation ahead of the money and ahead of the machinery that could build it cheap and sound. And the man who invented the repeating pistol, who changed war forever, went flat broke doing it and had to start all over. So when you picture a buckskin trapper twirling a shiny revolver on his finger against a mountain sunset, understand that's 2 whole eras mashed careless into one painting. The revolver belongs to the frontier that came after the beaver was already gone, and the trapper with it. Third pattern break. Feel how far it's climbed. We started this whole list down at a $7 smoothbore with a fox stamped on the lock, and we've climbed clear up to the machine that ended the age of one shot forever. And the very next gun took Colt's failed, bankrupt idea and turned it into the single most powerful thing a man could hold in one hand for the better part of 100 years. The 4th of January, 1847. Captain Samuel Walker of the Texas Rangers, a hard-fighting man who'd used the Patersons in real battle, sat down face to face with Sam Colt, the near-broke inventor, and between the two of them, a fighting man who knew exactly what he needed, and an inventor who knew how to build it, they designed a monster of a gun. The Colt Walker, .44 caliber, a 9-inch barrel long as a man's forearm, 4.5 pounds of solid iron balanced in one single hand. You could stove a man's skull with it empty. And a chamber that swallowed a full 60 grains of black powder behind the ball, pushing out past 500 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. A thunderclap and a gout of flame. Sit a good while with this next number, neighbor, because it's the one I teased you with at the very top. The Colt Walker was the most powerful commercially made repeating handgun in the entire world from the year 1847. And it held that crown, undefeated, until the .357 Magnum finally arrived in 1935. Do the sum. 88 years sitting at the very top of the mountain. 88 years, friend. Grandfathers to grandsons, and it was still king. That was the tease from the opening of this video, and there it sits, true. They only ever built 1,100 of them in total. 1,000 for the military and just 100 for civilians, which is exactly why the modern world has priced the few survivors clean into madness. A single original Colt Walker, the real thing with the right marks, has crossed the auction block for $1.84 million. $1.84 million for a handgun. But hear me close on this, friend, because it's the whole heart of it. That's a collector's number. It is not a frontier number. To Sam Walker, sitting there in 1847, it was a tool to win a fight and stay alive. Forged deliberately to do one brutal job savagely well and come back and do it again. We took that fighting tool and turned it into treasure locked behind glass and clean forgot it was ever meant to be gripped and fired and trusted with a life. The engineering still works today, every ounce of it. We just locked it in a climate-controlled case and hung a banker's price on it. The most powerful gun in the world for 88 straight years. And the next one never needed 1 grain of powder at all. And never once, in the whole history of the frontier, misfired. Number 2 is the humblest, plainest thing on this whole long list, and it is the one single item every last man out there carried without one exception. The plain belt knife. Not a brand name, not a legend with a novel behind it, a working blade on every hip, from the greenest trapper to the richest trader to the woman working hides in the lodge. Every soul, no exceptions. Because here's the hard truth. This whole list has been quietly driving you toward the entire time. Every gun we have named on this list gave a man 1 shot, or 5, if he was rich and lucky and living in the right decade, and then it was empty iron in his hands. A flint could shatter on the frizzen. Powder could take a damp and refuse the spark. A percussion cap could simply fail and give you nothing but a click. But the knife never misfired. Not one time. Not once in the entire recorded history of the American frontier. When the last shot was fired and gone, and the enemy was still coming in close, the blade was the one weapon on a man's body that was always, every second, loaded. It skinned the day's catch at noon, and it could save that same man's life by dark. The very same blade, the very same afternoon. It was the daily tool and the last resort welded into one edge of good steel. The whole dossier of the entire era comes down, finally, to this plain sentence. Knives were essential daily tools and last-ditch weapons both. And a man out there valued his knife above almost anything else he owned in the world. Above his horse some days. No auction house romances a plain butcher knife with a worn wood handle. There's no story in it they can sell. But that plain, cheap knife outlived every fancy, famous gun on this whole list, because it asked nothing of a man. No powder, no ball, no cap, no dry day. Just a hand to hold it and an edge kept keen, which is the whole point I've been walking you toward, neighbor. And number 1 is where I finally set it all down and say it plain. Number 1 is not a weapon at all. Number 1 is the thing that the other 11 were all pointing straight at the whole time, if you had the eyes to follow the line. Go all the way back to Josiah Wren, the trapper, from the very top of this video. Walking alone into the Wind River Range with $11 in trade goods and a smoothbore gun the movies would be plain ashamed to show you. He didn't survive that country because his gun was famous. He survived because he never once needed it to be. He needed one good shot to eat that day, a knife on his belt for when the shot was spent, and a clear head that understood down in the bone the cold arithmetic of ones. That was his whole armory. And it was enough, because he was enough. The question was never what those men carried. The question, the only real question, is who got rich selling you the legend? The novelist who put a shining hawken in a hero's hands 20 years too early to sell his book. The gun makers who dressed a plain working tool up in glory to move the fancy grade. The auction houses turning a fighting iron into a $1.8 million trophy behind glass. Every single one of them profited, and profited handsome, by making you believe deep down that the frontiersman needed something rare and expensive and famous to survive out there. He didn't. He never did. He needed a cheap gun that worked when he pulled the trigger and the hard-won skill to not need more than one shot from it. That, right there, is the skill of not needing. Friend, and it's the only weapon on this entire list that you cannot buy at any price, and that nobody living can ever take away from you. So tell me down below in the comments, which one of these did your grandfather or your great-grandfather actually own? Not read about in a book, not see in a picture, actually held in his two hands. A trade gun with a fox on the lock, a long rifle stood in the corner by the door, a plain belt knife handed down father to son to you. The one that shows up the most in the comments down there is the one I build the next full video around. So speak up. This is not a lifestyle channel, neighbor, and I'll not pretend it is. This is a library. That's all it ever was. And every single one of you watching is one more set of hands helping me keep the doors of it open and the lamp lit. Next time up on this channel, we're going after the pemmican that fed the whole fur trade from end to end. 4,000 calories packed into a single pound, made by a Cree woman's hands in a sewn hide bag, and the exact reason a trapper could walk 400 miles from the nearest store, and never once, not for a single day, go hungry. Keep the old ways. They kept us.